Welcome back to Minute Mythology's Week of the Dragon. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the red dragons are often described as the most powerful of chromatic dragons, and were known for being the most destructive of their brethren, and the favored children of their goddess and primordial mother Tiamat. The red dragons are a walking, flying manifestation of death, that revel in destruction in its most basic yet pure form, the absolute removal of all things through strength and fire. When the denizens of Faerun speak of dragons, the red chromatic dragon is in the forefront of their thoughts, for unlike their fellows, the red dragons were known to scorch entire swaths of land seemingly for no reason, and when crossed or slighted in any perceivable way, they would rain destruction down without mercy, leaving only a crater or a scar on the land to show what was once there. They're the largest and most physically powerful of the chromatic dragons, and are by far the most vain and quickest to anger, viewing themselves as the most powerful beings in all of the realms. They would amass hordes of treasure, and their avarice knew no limits, as no matter how much loot they added to their pile, it would never be enough. Diplomacy was never an option for a red dragon. Only complete servitude and reverence would give a mortal even the slightest possibility of mercy. However, though they were being spared death, most who encountered red dragons and survived suffered a far worse fate, becoming slaves or living trophies to be displayed within the dragon's lair. They typically make their lairs in mountainous regions where the area is hot, preferring volcanic regions over all others. This also ensured that the majority of their chromatic cousins would never pick a spot near them, as most would be unable or unwilling to live in such hot conditions, with possibly the blue dragons being the only exception. Their lairs were usually massive caverns that the red dragon would enslave mortals to constantly expand, adding statues, trophies, and other decor that depicted the master of the lair as a godlike being. Meanwhile, the dragon itself would usually roost far below the subterranean complex where they were closest to magma and fire. Their treasure hoards would be stored nearby, and the dragon was never far away for long. The area around the lair was subjected to constant earthquakes, and any water sources were inevitably tainted by sulfur. If that weren't bad enough, fissures would constantly open and close, creating temporary portals to the elemental plane of fire, allowing creatures to spill forth and create further havoc. The adult and ancient red dragons have a flight speed of 80 and a ground or climbing speed of 40. They have spectacular stats, and boast the highest strength and constitution, as well as incredibly high charisma. They're decently stealthy and have amazing perception, allowing them to hunt prey, but more importantly, keep watch over their domain. They have 3 legendary resistances per day, and can use a multi-attack consisting of their frightful presence, plus 1 bite attack and 2 claws. Alternatively, they can also strike with their tail as a full action, but as discussed before, this is a waste. Their breath weapon is a 90-foot cone that prompts a DC 24 dex save, which if failed results in 26 to 156 fire damage. Like the other ancient dragons, the red dragon also has 3 legendary actions it can use at the end of other creatures' turns. They can detect, make a free tail attack, or for 2 of the 3 actions they can make a wing attack that deals decent damage and can knock players prone. A red dragon's lair actions are a combination of crowd control and damage. The dragon can choose a 10x10 space to erupt in a boiling geyser. Players in this area must succeed on a DC 15 dex save or take 6 to 36 fire damage if they fail. They can also cause a massive tremor 60 feet around their feet that prompts a DC 15 dex save or else knocks the players prone. The dragon can also create a 40x40 cloud of volcanic gas that goes around corners. Any creature that starts its turn within this cloud must make a DC 13 con save, or else be poisoned. While poisoned, they are also incapacitated, and this lasts until the end of their next turn. As a DM, I would always have a dragon fighting in its lair if possible, as outside of the lair, the fight isn't as exciting or dangerous. For the red dragon specifically, I would rely on the fissures and earthquakes outside the lair, as well as the upper regions of the lair to damage the party or prevent them from resting while in the dragon's domain. With elementals and worshippers harrying them their entire journey, they're unlikely to get to the bottom of the dragon's lair unscathed. In actual combat, the red dragon is a pretty interesting case. Whereas I would almost always use a dragon's breath weapon at every opportunity, the red dragon is kind of special. Ironically, even though they're the strongest dragon, the dex save combined with fire damage being the most resisted damage type in D&D means that their breath attack could potentially be the weakest out of all types, depending on the player party makeup. Too many rogues, monks, or fire-based people means that the multi-attack might actually be more damaging in the long run, so keep this in mind. As with the other dragons, I would use the dragon's turn to either use a breath attack or a multi-attack, targeting players that could be the most dangerous, which for the most part are going to be melee players, until the dragon runs out of legendary resistances. I would use the first lair action to summon volcanic gas, as players are likely going to be more bunched up at the start of combat. Should multiple people fail the save against this, the dragon will effectively have an entire round to do whatever it wants, dousing them in a free fire breath attack or multi-attacks that deal massive damage. From there, I would alternate between tremors to try and knock melee players down, and either the gas or geyser, depending on whether I want players to potentially miss turns or be dealt fire damage from afar, specifically targeting healers whenever I can. When it comes down to it, the red dragon is the most straightforward aside from the white dragon. All of its moves and lair actions are about dealing damage, and taking out players before they can take it down. I would have the red dragon climbing just out of reach of melee players, or flying above, raining down fire and death. Like the other dragons, I would typically use the legendary actions to proc a wing attack followed by a tail attack, but if players are already prone due to a tremor or gas attack, I would instead use all 3 legendary actions for tail attacks to deal massive damage between the dragon's turns. It is my opinion that as the most vain and deadly dragons in the lore, a red dragon will not typically flee and give up their loot to players even if they're losing, instead electing to fight until the bitter end, defiant that any could ever defeat them. As with all dragons, the modern depiction and physicality of the D&D red dragon has its roots in European lore and mythology. The red dragon as we know it in contemporary media, and especially D&D, is most likely based on the classic European depictions of dragons, specifically the Welsh red dragon called y Thraig Goch, literally translated to the red dragon. The Welsh dragon myth begins with a great battle, when a Celtic Pendragon, or clan leader, named Vortigern claimed a stretch of land for his castle and was warned by a young magician, who some believe was Merlin in his youth, that the ground was above an underground lake, where 2 dragons slept waiting for their release. Vortigern naturally ignored this warning and broke the ground, where the 2 dragons were eventually released, one white and one red. After a vicious battle that saw the land partially decimated, the red dragon was victorious, and it was later said that the red had represented the Welsh people, and the white representing the Saxons or Britons, and that this was a prophecy foretelling a Welsh victory by some, and a prediction of the coming of King Arthur to others. Similar to other pre-Christian depictions of dragons, the red dragon of Wales was originally a benevolent godlike creature who watched over the growth of the Welsh people, protecting the land and its rulers from evil. There are countless old Welsh tales that depict the dragon and its champions as paragons of righteousness and protection, using flames to represent power and bravery, as well as the tempering of those flames to represent divine rulership and mercy. As the Middle Ages stretched on and Christianity took root, the dragons of various myths were turned into the more contemporary depiction. They became fire-breathing monsters associated in some areas with hell and damnation, and starred as the villains in countless stories. Despite all of this, the reclamation of Welsh and general Celtic history and tradition has seen the rise in recent decades of dragons being associated with righteousness once again. Depictions of heroes waving banners of dragons have become more popular. Comparing the monster to the myth, we see that the D&D red dragon is clearly influenced by the Welsh dragon of the same name, but has been written as it would have been in the Middle Ages. Instead of a protector, the red dragons of D&D are destruction incarnate, flames and death, hell-bent on subjugating or destroying all things in their path, which is probably why they're one of the most famous creatures in D&D and beyond. If you enjoyed that video, please leave a like and comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel. You can also join the Patreon for $1 a month to access videos days before they're posted here, as well as other exclusive stuff like short stories, videos, and more.